All right, well, I think we'll go ahead and begin. So welcome, friends, from wherever you are Zooming today on the planet, and a happy Mother's Day to those honoring and celebrating in the United States. We're so happy to see those of you who are with us live, and welcome the many more of you who are watching the recording. This is the Second Sunday Dharma Series, a fundraiser for the Insight Meditation community of Washington, D.C. We gather on the second Sunday of every month to spend time getting to know an inspiring Dharma teacher to get their take on the state of the world and through the lens of the Dharma, their own practice, and what's most important to them. My name is La Sarmiento. My pronouns are they, them, and I'm zooming in from the unceded land of the Piscataway, now known as Baltimore, Maryland, in the United States. I've been a teacher with IMCW for 12 years and a member of the Sangha for the last 25. I'm honored and blessed to be hosting this session. In a moment, I'll introduce and be in conversation with our guest today, my dear teacher and friend, Joe Weston, to talk about his book, Fierce Civility, Transforming Our Global Culture from Polarization to Lasting Peace. Before I do, just a few announcements. I would like to first thank Glenn for their tech support today. There is no ASL interpretation for this live session, and there will be ASL interpretation on the recording that you'll receive afterwards. If you'd like to access the closed captioning, please select CC on the Zoom menu and show subtitle. If you have any questions for Joe during our time together, please put them in the chat addressed to Ask Questions Here, and we'll get to as many as possible today. And lastly, we also encourage you to keep your camera on, as this can help to foster a sense of community. And if that doesn't work for you today, that's totally okay. So let's take a couple of minutes of silence to settle in to whatever posture would be most supportive for you at this time. As you ground yourself in your body, feel your breath, and appreciate yourself for taking time to be part of this session. I'll ring a bell to end our silence. All right. So I'd like to introduce my dear friend and teacher, Joe Weston, who is our guest today. So Joe is an international facilitator, author, lecturer, consultant, coach, professor, longtime Buddhist and martial arts practitioner, and above all else, an advocate for lasting peace. With a career spanning 30 plus years in the fields of conflict prevention, leadership, stress management, and communication, he's a highly sought after thought leader and trainer for individuals and corporations, government agencies, and nonprofits all around the world. I first met Joe in 2008 through a mutual friend. Little did I know that he would be one of my most influential teachers in my life. Before taking Joe's Respectful Confrontation workshop, my middle name was Doormat. As an immigrant, queer, and trans person of color, my main survival mechanisms were to people please and assimilate in order to feel a sense of acceptance in a world that often wants to deny my right to exist. Joe's fierce compassion, undying commitment to the awakening of all beings, and his deep embodiment of his many years of Tibetan Buddhist and martial arts practices are evident in his teaching and sharing of practices that have helped me realize and trust the power within me to speak and be my truth, especially in spaces where I've been the only one. I felt so inspired and transformed by that first experience with Joe that I then produced his Respectful Confrontation workshops for several years in DC. In many of the Western Buddhist convert sanghas and retreats I've experienced 25 years, we often learn and talk about wise effort, wise speech, and wise action. It wasn't until I met Joe did I truly understand the embodiment and manifestation of those paths. So thank you, Joe, for your tremendous impact on my life. And I'm so happy that you're here with us and so excited to share you with the IMCW Sangha.
Thank you. Am I supposed to say something after that? Thank you. And I just have to say that that you are a great mentor and teacher for me and friend, and best land person ever. I'm currently in La's apartment that I'm renting, so that's great. And I say always when I get the opportunity, and I hope it's often, that La, for you are for me the embodiment of compassionate wisdom, and a beacon of hope for me on this strange planet we live on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joe. So I'd like to start off by asking you, what influence did your Buddhist practice have in coming to write Fierce Civility?
Okay, so how many hours do we have for this? So the work is called Fierce Civility, and it was the next iteration after the first body of work that I developed called Respectful Confrontation. And I would say, well, the answer to your question is varied. There's a lot of influences. In fact, I would say that both of them are, but the Fierce Civility more so, of really understanding how to bring into our moment-to-moment lives the teachings of compassion and wisdom in various ways. And I've got plenty of the ways that I can connect that with the work that I'm doing. And I would say that it starts with, my life story. I always start by saying that I grew up in New York City, and just growing up in New York City every day was an examination of confrontation and conflict. And so I think I've been versed in that work since I was walking. And I grew up in a pretty volatile situation, challenging childhood, including my dad being in jail for some time. And for me, that already started, you could say, on the Buddhist path, because I would observe what was happening, try to find my way to survive with someone with a compassionate heart in such a harsh environment. And the question that kept coming to me, that has taken me through my whole life, is why is it, even though we know better, even though we are a relatively intelligent species and we have all the information we need at our fingertips, why is it, even though we know better, we still have arguments and fights, and on a larger scale, crime and war and oppression and hunger? Now, most people would say that's just the way we are, and that's an accurate answer. And I was never satisfied with that answer. I always wanted to investigate the causes of that. And that's been my whole life path. Starting, luckily, miraculously, someone said to me when I was a teenager and a young man, "You really need to meditate." Who just knew that I was so stressed out. And I said, "Oh, I couldn't sit still." And they said, "What about Tai Chi? That's meditation in motion." So that started me, was the blessing that I did that, to understand mind-body connection, to understand the workings of the mind, to understand energy systems, to understand Eastern philosophies, Taoism, Taoist principles, which I've studied, continue to study with various martial arts as well. But for me, the significant moment was in 1994 when I was living in the Netherlands, and I had the opportunity to go to a Dharma center and meet my teacher, Geshe Sonam Gyaltsen, who since 1994 has been an inspiration and a beacon for me. And I have learned so much from the depth of wisdom and compassion of this person. And I finally figured out that the Buddhism was going to help me get some answers to that question: why is it, even though we know better, we have arguments and fights? And the way I see that is that we're not going to solve our world problems until we start identifying what the root causes of that problem is. And for instance, with respectful confrontation, one of the subtitles that and La, you know this, that I use is respectful confrontation. It's never about the dishes. And that we can spend decades fighting about the dishes and arguing. And we think that by fighting about it and arguing and complaining that we're actually making progress, when actually we're just creating more stagnation and more opposition and polarization. And what both bodies of work, particularly Fierce Civility, helps me do in those practices is to get to the root cause of the issue. And that for me is directly from the teachings that I learned from Shakyamuni Buddha on the Four Noble Truths, where the first noble truth being that samsara is inherently suffering. And as while we're in samsara, we are inherently suffering. And the second noble truth is that there are causes to that suffering, which leads us to the third, which there are ways to eliminate that suffering. And the fourth noble truth is that the Buddhist path offers ways to do that, to find our liberation. So that's revolutionary in a sense of thinking that we are often, if we think we're victims to our circumstances and the challenges we have both internally and externally. Yes, we can't control all the things that are happening to us externally, but a lot of my work is where can you find power? And where you can always find power is keeping your nervous system regulated, cultivating that inner calm, monitoring your response to stress, and cultivating resilience and building authentic, nurturing relationships. But that part of how we respond to stress is a way that we can start seeing that we can actually make change happen, make transformation happen within ourselves and others when we can clarify that an issue is happening, whether it's a polarization or a struggle, and do your best to find the causes of that. And when you address the causes, then the problems go away. As you know, La, I've worked for NASA for many years. You come with me to work there as well. And I love working with engineers because I love that kind of mind and this idea of root cause analysis, that if you want to solve a problem, got to identify what the cause is. And focus on that. And we're not really trained to do that, or we're in such a dysregulated state that it's hard for us to quiet down enough to have that independent critical thinking to be able to discern what is really happening and what is our perception of what is happening to get to the root cause. I can say more about that, but I'll take a breath there. And there's plenty more how my Buddhist practice connects with the work.
Yeah, thank you so much, Joe. I mean, you point to, the definition of the word vipassana, which is, what insight meditation is, to see clearly. And, your sharing of, if we're dysregulated, and I tell my mentees all this time, it's really hard to be mindful when we're stressed out. And so, our practice really is that of supporting us to, create that stability, that equanimity, that ability to be aware of what's happening and, really take care of ourselves first before, responding. We live in a very reactionary society, world, and I think that's often what causes a lot of our problems, is that coming from that place. Yeah. So what do you think, Joe, are the root causes of polarization and opposition?
Not enough coffee? No, that's not. So the way I would frame that is it has to do with dysregulation, first of all. So in Fierce Civility, what I'm positing is that what Fierce Civility is approaching our current world situations from not necessarily the what, but the how. We get so caught up in trying to solve our world problems, and we spend a lot of time, energy, and money and resources battling out who's right and who's wrong, who's going to win, who's going to lose, who's good and who's bad. And we get caught in the cycle of the mental realm of opinions. and that's just not working. And millions and millions of dollars are being spent on research projects to figure out solutions to our world problems. And some of those solutions are really great and could really work. But unfortunately, as long as we're in a consistent state of dysregulation, as long as we're suffering from some level of trauma, whether that's personal, cultural, or generational, then we're going to constantly be in that fight, flight, freeze response. And in that fight, flight, freeze response, anything that we perceive as different or new, we're going to see that as a threat, and most likely a threat to our existence. Therefore, we're not going to open to new solutions. And what that process is doing is also closing down our hearts. If you think about it, the world has become so much more cynical. The civil discourse has become worse and worse. It's become normalized. We're so entrenched in needing to be right and to get our policies passed, which is creating more separation, more polarization, and is not leading to solutions that are going to benefit and that are actually going to last. Because we can see that we can change policy, and what we're seeing play out now is can have policy, and 50 years later it gets dismantled. And as long as we're on that level, we're all in the mental realm. And what this work is doing what I believe the true power of certainly the compassion training in Buddhism is get back to our hearts, understand the wisdom and the power of the heart, common sense, cultivates the courage and the skills and the strategies to meet people where they are and appeal to their hearts. So that's one of the root causes, I would say, of polarization is we've lost contact with our hearts. And if you think about it, your uncle or your cousin who you are terrified to go to Thanksgiving dinner with or whatever, at one point you were loving each other and you were having fun, and they took care of you, and they may have changed your diaper and all of those things. And now we forget those things. And and I think that's what's causing that is we're frightened to open our hearts. And that it's not a Hallmark cardy sentimental thing of opening our heart. It's real concrete skills and strategies. So I would say that's one thing. And from a Buddhist perspective also is that we can't discern anymore between what is, as we see what happening with misinformation and disinformation, with what is true. You know, I remember with my teacher, we spent 2 years studying the four highest the tenets of the four highest philosophical schools. We spent 2 years studying the difference between what exists, what is real, and what is true. And it was remarkable, and it transformed my whole neural pathways in a sense. And we've lost that capacity to be able to slow down and do that, and to see that not just externally, but internally, we have an enormous amount of internal polarizations that we're not even aware we have. And that keep us in this cycle of opposition. And, you know, the big reason why I developed a lot of this work, going back to why is it, even though we know better, we have arguments and fights, was just sometimes the shock of seeing how, particularly in Dharma centers and spiritual communities, that when we're all in the meditation room in the gompa or whatever, our hearts are open, we're all resonant in loving highest values. And literally, I remember one time leaving a Dharma center and someone was driving me back to where I lived. Within 20 minutes, they were yelling at someone on the highway. So it all went out the window. Or it could be really loving in the work you're doing, but then when it gets to working at a Dharma center, as you know, when who's going to do the mailing, who's going to clean the toilets, it can devolve into fight, flight, freeze in a way that you're not even aware. And for me, the work is we all must do the work. I would speak for myself. I must do the work of bridging that disconnect. That it just can't be, right? The beautiful thing about Vipassana is you're sitting on a mat in silence, in essence, in a beautiful retreat center where your food is taken care of usually, and you're cultivating that there. But the work of Fierce Civility is how do you maintain that level of equanimity in the struggles, walking on the streets, when you're dealing with daily moment-to-moment dysregulation around you, if not within yourself. That's the real work. And I believe that that's the work that's being asked of us. Mother Earth is asking that of us. All sentient beings are asking that of us. For those of us who have the privilege and the resources and the blessings to be able to practice and in a way where I work with communities around the world where just a daily practice for them is just to make sure a bomb doesn't drop on their head. Or in some of the communities that I've worked with in the United States, when just where's the next meal going to come from? For those of us with the privilege of not having to be a sentient being on that level, with that karma at the moment, what are we going to do with the blessed experience we have and turn our practice into action?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you so much, Joe. So how do you define what fierce civility is? And something that you mentioned in the book is a distinction between fierce civility and chronic niceness. So if you could share a bit more about that.
Yeah. So a lot of our internal polarizations are what's keeping us from stepping into this, a deeper embodiment and taking action into what in our hearts we truly aspire towards, what we wish for. And part of that is I'm seeing is that our current definition of civility is not going to be able to be strong enough or isn't strong enough to stand face to face with the level of lack of civility and breakdown of civil discourse we're seeing. We have seen over the last certainly 10 years that it's been rewarded to be uncivil and to operate from a win at all costs mentality, to fight, to tear the other down instead of find ways to work together. And therefore, I've really felt it was necessary for people who did, because in essence, how do you confront a bully without becoming a bully? And what we're seeing is a lot of people are taking on the bully stance to confront bullies, but not understanding that the bully system has just turned you into a zombie bully in a sense. They've just pulled you into their system. And now you're part of that system and you're contributing to that system. Fighting the system is feeding the system. And if you're someone who would like to see the system shift into one that's more equitable, more inclusive, one that's more peaceful and more in relationship with the environment of all sentient beings, fighting I don't think that's the best strategy. It might feel good in the moment, good short-term strategy. So if you're not going to fight, and one of the strong polarities, internal polarities, is we think we only have those two options, either be aggressive or be passive. And as long as we're stuck in that, we're creating that stagnation. I do this, it's like two rams. The stagnation of polarization is where there's that constant pushing, I'm right, no, I'm right. And a lot of the work is understanding to find the power of the pivot that in that. And I see Lauren's on here. She knows that from her martial arts as well, right? That comes from the martial arts, that continuing to push something. And we see that play out because of the high levels of anxiety and uncertainty. We have reverted to some very deep personal and collective fight, flight, freeze responses. Many of us, in terms of dealing with what's going on with the world system, we want to fight the system. And we just see that that's just alienating people. And we're trying to rush people to transform in a way that they're not ready yet, which is causing more insecurity and lack of safety. Or we're in this flight response where we're trying to go back to the 1950s or a time when things were great. Where we're not in the present moment, we're not connected to our present moment. But most of us, I would say, are in a freeze response, where we know that things need to change. We want to see things change, but either we don't know how and we get stuck in that, or we're still not ready to say, if I really want to see things transform, it's going to be uncomfortable for me. I might have to let something go. And many of us are not ready to do that yet. So this work is understanding that in the freeze response, we're most likely in chronic niceness, where basically we can't see that our niceness is actually causing more harm by saying yes when we should say no, or saying no when we should say yes, or not saying anything and watching injustices happen. So the pivot here is to realize that to break the pattern of fierce and civility. I'd actually want to read the definition of civility that's in the dictionary. Cultured, courtesy, politeness, a polite act or expression characterized by taste, refinement, or restraint. That's civility. How is that going to successfully meet the challenges we're currently seeing? And I want to just characterize this idea of characterized by taste. That to me implies a civility that's Victorian, that's of a privileged European colonial idea of how we should be. And that is shifting. Whether we want it to or not, it's shifting. And so the idea of fierce civility is teaching us the skills to be able to meet challenges and not relent, and to stay strong in our civility. That we have to actually fight's not the right word, but strive to remain civil. It's a daily practice for us to stay civil, to not fall into the patterns of the bully, not only in action, but mostly in thought and words. And if we could just be mindful of that, then things could shift. We will be different. And the fierce civility is training yourself to be a nurturer and protector of yourself and others, as opposed to be an aggressor or defender. And this idea, and we're seeing that in cultures of people where fierce it's not about aggression. In fact, I would say that the more someone needs external forces of aggression, like guns and false patriarchal senses of power, you could say, the more you need or gossip or sarcasm or all the ways that we externally try to hold on to some sense of power, the more you need that, then in essence, you could say that you on some level don't feel powerful enough within that you can take care of yourself. And that there's an enormous power in the fierceness, the vulnerability of fierceness. That the first step is to take care of yourself and then radically find a way to activate the transformational power of your heart to appeal to the others, find a way past all the mental constructs that keep us separate so that we can get back to connecting from my humanity to your humanity. And it is from there that new solutions will emerge. And it is only in, I believe, we see that we come up with solutions that suit ourselves and those that we would consider loved ones. And again, that might be a short-term solution, but the long-term solutions for a culture of lasting peace means we must cultivate the skills and the strategies to engage with people we don't know, find alliances in surprising places, and do the messy work of engaging with them. Because I believe that on some level, every human being on this planet has in their hearts a piece of the puzzle to the solutions that we're all waiting for. Everyone. And because we become siloed and polarized, and we're now only connecting with people from different tribes, you could say, that those pieces of the puzzle are not going to come together. And that my commitment is to create spaces where people can come together so that we can all lay out our own pieces to do the work, to allow the solutions that are ready to emerge. And they will be resilient, they will be sustainable because they have within them the coding of each diverse voice that has been involved. So in essence, the reason why they will survive and they will grow and they will flourish is because people from each faction or different group has an investment, a buy-in to see them succeed.
Thank you, Joe.
That's where you view civility.
You're probably the most hopeful person I know, Joe, and there's just so much in the news that we receive 24/7, 365 every single day, that sometimes it just feels like we're beyond hope for building a civil society. It seems like there's little hope for us coming together. How do you define hope and what gives you hope?
Well, I first define it by saying I'm not necessarily optimistic, but I'm hopeful that, I'm not always optimistic for what's unfolding. And I've been saying, La, since you know me, even before, since like when I first started doing respectful confrontation lectures and trainings, is I would start by saying, the bad news is that the systems as we know them are crumbling. The good news is the systems as we know them are crumbling. And that's what's been causing this heightened level of anxiety and uncertainty, which has caused the breakdown of civic engagement, civil discourse, personal agency, and independent critical thinking. I believe that because of my Buddhist practice, and I do believe in the teachings of Shakyamuni Buddha on reincarnation, that things must come to an end for something new to be born. I just look at nature. I don't even have to go to my Buddhist practice. Just look at nature as that death is a necessary cycle to life, and that there is a system that's dying away and something new will be born. And it is being born. So what gives me hope is just knowing that. And I see it. I'm connected with I know about hundreds of organizations, thousands of individuals around the world who are committed to creating global unity. So what gives me hope is to know that. The problem we're in right now is we're in this uncomfortable place of those who really benefit and are privileged from the old system are doing everything they can to not let it die away. And it's messy. Mm-hmm. It's really, and it might get messier. So I'm not optimistic about that, but I have hope in the human spirit. And I have hope, I believe that if you really understand the depths of that in Buddhist teachings, the teachings on emptiness or voidness, that nothing exists inherently. Nothing is concrete. Everything shifts and changes. Everything is interdependent. Everything is dependent on causes and conditions, which leads in those teachings to understand that if that's the case, that everything can shift and change and anything is possible, including that every sentient being has a Buddha potential, that within each and every one of us, we all have a Buddha potential. I didn't make this up. And this is a belief. I believe it. I don't believe it blindly. I've been studying it now since 1994, and I've come to the conclusion for me that it is true. If that's the case, that gives me hope. Mm-hmm. That and the practices that I do that are associated with Fierce Civility and that I've been doing for years every morning on Tuesdays with reviving the global heart practice is helping us see that our mental constructs are actually what's causing the problems. And that, as you may know in Buddhist teachings, that we delineate others as loved ones, strangers, and adversaries. What gives me hope is understanding that if you just think now, if you think of a loved one, a stranger, and an adversary, they are not inherently a loved one. They're not a loved one from their side. You have labeled them loved one. You have labeled them stranger. You have labeled them adversary. In other words, if you think about someone that you're married to currently or in partnership with or really good friends, they were not always a loved one. Probably 40 years ago, they were a stranger to you. Did they change? No. The label changed. They're still who they are. And that what gives me hope is knowing that how much power I have to understand that a lot of what's unfolding in the world, I have power to see that a lot of it is my own mental constructs. The idea that we are separate is a mental construct. It's inherently not true. We are independent. We are interconnected. That is true. And yet the disconnect of knowing that to be true and how we're still operating, where we can still walk down the street and walk over homeless people, and where we can still say that they're the ones who caused the problems. It's not my America, that's their America, for instance, for those of us in the United States, and not see that we're all inherently engaged with what's unfolding, and we are all inherently capable of being part of the solution. That gives me hope.
Yeah. Thank you, Joe. So in that spirit, would you be willing to share one of your practices or contemplations with us now?
Sure. Yeah. How much time do I have to do that?
Probably about like 5 minutes.
Ooh, okay. All right, let's do that. So I invite you all to, if you choose to do this, there's no right way to do this or wrong way to do this. It's about finding your way. I invite you to sit in a way where your spine can be straight without being rigid. I'm assuming some of you have some practice in, this isn't necessarily a meditation. It's a more an analytical meditation. So sitting where your spine is straight without being rigid, relax your jaw, your shoulders, your belly. Bring your attention to a spot in your lower belly, approximately the width of 3 fingers below your navel and a third of the way into the body, from the front of the body, what I would call your center. You might know it as your dantian or your hara. Placing your full attention on this spot. According to Taoist teachings, that this is where your awareness, your perception resides. Cultivating deeper level of awareness and listening. And I would say this is where your personal power resides. So bringing this awareness now to this place in your center, bringing awareness to the parts of your body that are connecting with what you're sitting on and the ground. And from those places where your body, your contact points, where your body connects with the ground, like the bottoms of your feet or your thighs and the chair, feeling the stability there. All those signals going up to the brain, letting the brain know that under you it is stable. When you decide and see that it's stable, let yourself be held. Honoring Mother Earth that is under you and the ground being a representation of Mother Earth, knowing that Mother Earth does not discriminate. She holds each one of us equally. Let yourself be held. Honoring the lands under you and those who stewarded those lands in the sacred way that they did so that you can walk them with ease and freedom. For me, for us, that's the Piscataway people. And bringing awareness to your center, feeling your feet on the ground, awareness to your center. Now bring awareness to the middle of your chest, where your heart center resides, and where Taoist and Buddhist teachings will tell you this is where your mind resides, your consciousness. And with your feet on the ground, focusing in your center, bringing awareness to your heart, take a full deep breath in through your nose, and out through your mouth. Taking a moment from your center and from your heart with honor and respect, connecting with all those people who are joining in on this experience as allies. Deepest reverence for their path and all that they have accomplished, their triumphs that have shaped who they are in this moment, and their path and desire to bring more compassion into themselves, those around them, and the planet itself. And with that awareness and reverence towards those joining in on this practice, take a deep breath, always in through your nose, out through your mouth. Feeling that sense of heart expansion as you do this. Now bringing awareness from your center and your heart to all human beings, beginning first with those human beings you would label loved ones. Who arises in your heart? What faces do you see? Does that instigate or shift your level of open-heartedness in this moment or safety? And as you're engaging with them, just to consider just the idea that within them resides the Buddha potential. Allowing energy to flow and emotions to flow. building on this sense of connection with your core and your heart, feeling your feet on the ground from your center and from your heart, become aware of strangers. Who arises in your heart? How many do you see? What faces do you see, or groups of people? Could be neighbors, could be people you saw in the supermarket, could be someone you saw on the news, or someone you just imagine on the other side of the planet. How many strangers can you hold in your heart at this moment? And guess what? You have about almost 8 billion to choose from, most likely. How does that influence your level of open-heartedness and presence and level of safety? With this awareness of strangers in your heart, take a deep breath in. Considering that in each and every one of these strangers, there is a Buddha potential. Maybe even rejoice in that. That karmically, statistically, one time their Buddha potential will arise. And from your center and from your heart, become aware of those human beings you would label adversary. Who arises in your heart? What faces do you see? Does that shift your level of open-heartedness? Does that shift your level of safety? There's no good or bad or right or wrong. Simply notice. And from your center and from your heart, engaging with them in the best way you can with honor and respect. Considering that even with this person, even that person has a Buddha potential. You don't have to see it the same way I do. I just ask you to consider in this moment. And as you now engage with all human beings, loved ones, stranger, and adversary, considering the Buddha nature of yourself as well as them, understanding that these labels can shift, that strangers can become allies and loved ones, that adversaries may not be adversaries, but simply strangers who hold different views than you do. And as you engage now with yourself and all human beings, just visualizing the capacity of every human being to break down the separations of separation. And in this moment, see very clearly everyone just acknowledge and open to an embodied experience of interdependence and interconnection. One global heart. With that awareness, take a full deep breath in. And allow all human beings to flow into your heart as you bring your awareness back to this group of meditators that you are in resonance with at this moment. With gratitude and honor and respect, allow those in this meditation circle to flow into your heart as you bring your awareness back to yourself, giving yourself in this moment a sense of compassion towards yourself. And as you hold each and every human being in your heart, recognizing, according to the Tibetan teachings on compassion, lojong, this idea that if you understand karma and reincarnation, that every single being on this planet at some time has been your mother. As we celebrate Mother's Day, every sentient being, every beetle, every creature has at some time cared for you in some loving way. Just take that in with gratitude and a desire to want to give that back. Let's take one final breath to close this practice. And as you open your eyes, look around and imagine now walking what you've currently cultivated in your heart into the world with ease, with safety, with power, with skill, with joy, and with humor. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joe. So empowering, so powerful. So before we end our conversation together, what are a few things our Sangha members here can start doing to make a difference, other than practicing that beautiful meditation you just offered?
I would say some things to consider. One of the pivots in the book is called "Love Thy Stranger." That we get stuck in the pattern of friend or foe and loved one or enemy, and that we can pivot and realize that there's a lot of work we can do to engage with strangers. So, I grew up in a big city, so I'm already trained and have the habituation to have to engage with strangers. So I would say that's a part of it is what can you do? I mean, I live in DC where people just do not engage with each other. It blows my mind sometimes. Even as you know, on the very floor where I live, people who live next door to me, who share a wall with me, when I'm going to open my door, walk by without even acknowledging that I'm there. If we're still at the level where we can't even acknowledge each other in elevators and on the street, why do we think we're going to solve our world problems? So I would say make a practice of taking your buds out of your ears. Stop looking at your devices when you're in public places. Take a breath, look around, hear things, feel things, taste things, and engage with strangers. That's what I would say. That will already start bridging in a way that could create a momentum. I would also say that it's important to always make sure you're safe. And when you cultivate your level of safety, that gives you a chance to open your heart more and take your precious practices and actually put them into action in the world. So finding that balance between cultivating on your own your level of inner harmony and balance, and then practicing to be able to maintain that in strenuous situations. And to just remember that when you consider appealing to the hearts of others, people don't change, they transform. Asking someone to change, I would say at some level, is aggression, maybe violence. People can't become something they're not. But asking someone to transform on their own time and in their own way is how we can see change happen. That's a strategy for hope. And what transforms in people are their viewpoints, habits, and patterns. And that the only way people will transform their viewpoints, habits, and patterns is if they feel some level of safety and trust. So be a refuge of safety and trust to as many beings as you can. That'll create more malleability and receptivity in others who hold different views for you as well, to maybe start shifting that and finding new solutions.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Joe, for your wisdom and just your many, many years of practice and diligence in, remembering the core teachings of wisdom and compassion. So we'll go ahead and just do some Q&A. So I put in the chat, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat address to ask questions, or if you'd like, you can raise your hand and we can do it live with Joe. But a couple questions that I've gotten so far, Joe. One is from Lauren. How does fierce civility avoid showing up as tone policing of oppressed peoples?
I don't know what your viewpoint is on what you just said, so that would be interesting to get an idea. I think that it's the antidote to it. Can you say the question again? Because I thought it was so beautifully phrased.
Yeah. How does fierce civility avoid showing up as tone policing of oppressed peoples?
It's another form of aggression. The tone policing, on all sides. So that has to come back to looking at your own internal polarizations. I think the question is, do you want to the antidote or the pivot away from where many of us are in this sense of I'm right, therefore if you have a different view, you must be wrong. And the antidote to that is that to ask yourself the question, do you want to be right or do you want to be effective? And I think fierce civility what you're naming is almost another form of chronic niceness, is that, I want to monitor what you say so that I can feel comfortable. And that's on all groups are doing that on some level. And part of the work of fierce civility is, and you know this very well, Lauren, is help people feel within that they are powerful and that they can take care of themselves so they don't have to control their external environment for that level of safety. And that's because that's just creating more opposition and separation. So I think, the chronic niceness part of it is that you're still oppressing people, but you're using not kind, but niceties and what I just defined as politeness. And I think it's a question of the process is messy. The process of transformation and growth and healing is messy. And monitoring the tone of people is a convenient way to not get to the messy. And we're not going to see change happen or transformation happen if we don't get to the messy. Sorry, if it was different the way I've observed it in my years of work around the world, particularly in conflict-ridden zones, it's got to be messy, and it's going to be messy. And we've got to train ourselves to stay regulated and in our hearts in the messy. Does that address your question, Lauren? Do you have anything else to add to that?
Can we unmute there, Lauren?
I was trying to unmute, but I was getting a message that I couldn't unmute myself.
Okay.
Thank you, Joe. No, that's fascinating. And, someday maybe we can have a really long conversation about it. But yeah, it's all fascinating, everything you're saying. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. And a question from Will. How do we overcome the absence of a shared truth or reality due to mis and disinformation? How do we overcome the absence of a shared truth or reality due to mis and disinformation?
Will, I love that question. And I would start with saying, I don't feel that there's an absence I don't think that we all have to have the same truth. I would think it would be a very boring world if we did. And so I'm not sure. I mean, I'm sure maybe there's more nuance in what you're asking. But one of the things I've been saying, Alon knows this too, again, since I started teaching these workshops, if only hanging out with people who already agree with us were going to solve our world problems, we would have solved our world problems. So we have to look at things anew. We all have to transform our viewpoints and habits and patterns, all of us. And holding on to an idea that our viewpoints are better than others is what's contributing to the problems. They're not better. I would say our viewpoints or my viewpoints might not be better. They may lead to a more equitable world, a more harmonious and peaceful world, but that doesn't make them better. The value judgment of making it better is what's causing the stagnation and the polarization. And one of the fundamental pivots that I've had in all of my work is this idea of my truth does not equal the truth. There may be a fundamental the truth, like the Tao or the Dharma, or universal truth, or God. There may be however you might want to label it. But it's kind of arrogant for a human being to think that they have the capacity to comprehend the full range of the truth. So that's a humbling thing that I think is important, is to start with, I can't possibly know everything. That already makes me more compassionate towards myself and others and more curious to want to learn. So I think that the disinformation and the misinformation is a real problem. I don't think it's an existential problem. I think it's more a political problem, a social problem. It's a collective trauma problem, and it's a privilege problem where people have just somehow managed to believe that. I say this as well here in the United States. The original Declaration of Independence or the Constitution said we have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We only have the right to pursue happiness. Unfortunately, not many had that right 200, almost 250 years ago, and we're trying to figure out ways so that more people in this country have that right to pursue happiness. But I feel like somewhere in the 1950s, and since then, we've lost the to pursue part, And I believe that we're living in a world, and certainly in this country, where we say we have the right to life, liberty, and happiness. We have the right to happiness, which is a misconception. No one has we should want to have happiness, but to claim happiness, that was just the precursor to I have a right to my own facts. If I have a right to be happy, then I have the right to see reality the way I want to have it. And that's where the root cause of that is. We don't have a right to our own facts. We have a right to our own perception of those facts. And so in terms of how do we break that pattern is to acknowledge that I can't possibly know everything. Therefore, even someone who I believe is saying things that are not true, just in the fact that they believe it, there's some kind of information there that I can use that could be used as finding common ground. Not the fact itself, but the fact that they want to believe that. That's where I can find common ground and appeal to their heart, to try to find a bridge to help where I can learn more about maybe I am not seeing it the whole truth, and to maybe help them see that they have probably been misled if they believe things that are fundamentally not true. But again, do you want to be right or do you want to be effective? That's the important question when you're approaching that.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Will. I got this question, Joe. Why should I be civil when others don't care about civility?
On one level, I would say we have no choice, and there's different levels to that. Because if you choose not to be civil because others are not, then they've won. As simple as that. Then the bully system has won, and that's what it's doing. It's been relentless in trying to wear us down, so that we feel disconnected, we feel disempowered, we feel isolated, we feel hopeless, and it's trying to wear us down to get to the point where we become like that. So that's the fierceness and the civility. So that's one thing. By saying I don't want to be civil, they've won. Second thing is that's just according to your value system. It has nothing to do with them. If you are truly a Buddhist meditator and believe in the principles of Buddha or the teachings of Buddha or Jesus or Muhammad or the Jewish mystics, then you will know in your heart that it's not about what's outside. It's about your cultivation of your highest values and principles. So that's another response to that. Why do you be civil? Because it's who you truly inherently are. And why not be who you truly and inherently are? Now, there's another level of that is that that doesn't mean you have to then be a doormat, as our dear law said, or let people walk over you, or allow things to happen that you don't feel are justified to happen. And that's where the fierceness comes in. And that's a practice. I don't know who asked that, but if you have more that you want to ask around that, I think it's a really great question. And I always want to make sure that you're satisfied in the response. And if not, please continue.
Thank you, Joe. This is from Stephen. Are there ways that we can talk to people who we agree with politically, but who look at anyone who disagrees with us as evil or stupid?
What was the beginning of that?
Yeah. Are there ways that we can talk to people who we agree with politically, but who look at anyone who disagrees with us as evil or stupid?
I say that's part of the. So in the Fierce Civility book, I break it down into skills and strategies. And one of the skills in that is meeting people where they are. So meet them where they are. And then one of the fundamental ways of breaking out of polarities is to be curious and compassionate. Because, if I was in that situation, I would start by saying, why are they holding on to that viewpoint? Somewhere probably inherently in themselves, they feel scared. So I can find compassion in their fear. Or they have unexamined assumptions. Many of us do this, is that we take on beliefs that we were taught by our parents or our churches or our governments or our teachers or our peers. And we haven't taken the time to examine whether we truly believe them to be true or not. So I think that's a question of, they might just be holding on to viewpoints that they never took the time to examine. So invite them into a conversation. This was a big point with the teacher training program I developed with the women's rights organization I work with in Gaza, where I've worked in the Middle East with many women's rights organizations to help. Actually, with this particular group was brilliant. They trained men to be ambassadors, to go back into their communities, to train other men how to stop beating their wives and how to reframe their viewpoints of women and girls. And they're now skilled and be able to sit with a man who, I can give a quick story where one man was talking to his brother, actually, and it was time for both of his children to maybe go to university, a boy and a girl. And the ambassador, part of my training, says, who are you going to send? And the brother said, well, my son, of course, because inherently that's what he's the boy, so he would go. And then the ambassador started asking questions. Well, I'm just curious, who's the better one at school? And he said, the daughter. Who would benefit more from the university training? Well, probably my daughter, because my son is he's more of a mechanic. He likes to build things. So through that conversation of questions, a curiosity, a compassion, a meeting that person where they were, helped them to reframe their viewpoints and actually make the decision to send their daughter to university and not their son. So I think that that's the way to approach that, is that it's not about the what, but the how. So that's, and approaching that person, if they think that that person is stupid, it's just not a good approach to look at what's unfolding on this planet at this moment. Because I can argue, I know a lot of very smart people who and I say that a lot, this world is filled with an enormous amount of information gatherers who haven't learned very much. I'm taking a breath on that one.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Stephen. And one last question, Joe, from Brooks. Can you also talk about things we can do at the wider societal level to further this teaching?
I think it starts with first acknowledging what you want your scope of influence to be. I think that this work is really training ourselves to follow the bodhisattva path, you could say. It's about cultivating the bodhicitta, the awakened heart, to have deeper levels of wisdom and compassion for others. In the process of creating this being refuge of safety and trust, to allow yourself and others to transform to be the best that you can be and resonate from your highest values and principles. So in essence, if your scope of influence is just friends and family, that's already enough. It could be community, and you could want to do it on a larger scale. One of the final chapters in the book is offering a blueprint for lasting peace. And the pivot that's presented in that is that cultural transformation must begin with personal transformation. So it may sound vague, but I would say it starts with cultivating these principles within yourself and embodying them. And that there's a model that I've used that many people around the world, particularly who are doing humanitarian work, called in transformational leadership. There's a 3-step model that I use and that we use for this blueprint of lasting peace. And it's, how do you approach a power over system? And how can you shift a power over system? And that's what we're seeing. It's a power over system. Fighting that system, as I said, is not going to shift it. It's just going to add to it. Acquiescing to it, also not. Running away from it, also not. Fight, flight, freeze. But by turning the attention to yourself, you cultivate power within. And then you become more resourceful. You are not burning out. You have more energy. You're more what I call the renewable you. You are more energetic, resourceful. You can make use of your time and energy. And you're resonating from your highest values. It's coming from your heart. You are instantly going to attract other people who resonate similarly. And that moves to the second part, which is power with. Power within to power with. Create new alliances. And hopefully those alliances are with people in surprising places who you never thought would be an ally of yours. And that you may not share common views about particular issues, social and political issues, but where you do find common ground is a commitment to a culture of civility and common values along that. You've just expanded your power scope. From there, you are more informed and have more resources and more power to do the last part, which is power two, where you create situations where people who are disempowered and don't have the privileges that you have, that you create experiences for them to do the same. And it's a slow process, but it's an organic process that leads to more and more people stepping into resonance on these higher values. And not just from an idea, but actually speaking it and living it. And I'm also seeing with organizations, there are hundreds of organizations around the world, around this country, that are doing work around depolarization and creating cultures of civility, even in politics. So there's plenty of places to align with other groups. And transforming those closest to you is already huge. The most revolutionary thing that we can do at this time in a power over system that wants to keep us dysregulated and isolated is to cultivate inner balance, nurture ourselves, and continue to cultivate and strengthen our relationships that we currently have.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Brooks. Before we end, I'd just like to add this story of something that Joe empowered me during a respectful confrontation workshop. You were talking, Joe, about the power of our heart, the vibration of our heart, in heart math. And I remember I used to live in DC, and I would notice, like what Joe was saying, that I would pass people on the sidewalk or see people on the subway, and nobody would ever look at each other or acknowledge each other. So I made it a practice over the course of a year to acknowledge people when I passed by them. I would look at them, and I would actually send them stealth loving kindness wishes. You know, may you be happy, may you be peaceful, may you be free from suffering. I did that for a year. And after about a year, I noticed that people started looking at me and smiling at me. And so I said to my partner, Wendy, sweetie, do you notice that people in DC are getting friendlier? And she's like, no, they're not. And I said, well, they're smiling at me and looking at me now. And she said, it's because you have a yes face, like you welcome that, like you're connecting with people. I have a no face. I don't want anyone talking to me or looking at me when I'm walking to work. So there's something about, just that small act that can shift so powerfully. And like what you were saying, Joe, in terms of information gathering and a lot of talking that we do, it's really, a felt sense and embodiment that we can also share with those that are strangers to us. So we'll close now. So thank you, everyone, for your questions and your presence here today. And Joe, would you like to offer a really short closing meditation before we end?
Sure. Let's see. Okay. So coming back to yourself, maybe rubbing your hands together, placing one hand on your lower belly, on your center, one hand on your heart, feeling your feet on the ground. Focus, bringing your awareness to your feet on the ground, focusing in your center, awareness in your heart. Take a nice deep breath in through your nose, out through your mouth. Let's do that again. In through your nose, and through your mouth. And in this moment, just acknowledging and connecting with all of the beings you've connected with to this point in this lifetime, who are holding space for heart resonance, who are warriors of heart, who have inspired your heart, who have shown you compassion, shown you kindness, who are dedicated to creating a world of the transformational power of the heart. And with the deepest of gratitudes, taking a nice deep breath. And now considering all of the many, many people that you are going to encounter from this point on through the rest of your life, who will inspire your heart, who will provide acts of compassion and kindness, who are dedicated to a world of equity, nonviolence, peace, who will move you in ways that you can't even imagine and become new allies in resonance of the heart. With gratitude, take a deep breath for them. And either with a physical bow or an internal bow of reverence and acknowledgement to yourself, as you in every moment continue to meet yourself with compassion and inspiration. And shake it out.
Thank you so much, Joe, for sharing your presence, the depth of your practice, and your empowering wisdom with us today. And thank you, dear Sangha, for your presence and generosity in supporting IMCW's Second Sunday Dharma Series fundraiser. The recording of this event will be emailed to all registered within the week. Please check out Joe's book, Fierce Civility, Transforming Our Global Culture from Polarization to Lasting Peace. It's really a training. It's not just a book. So please check our newsletter or website for the next Second Sunday Dharma Series, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, everyone.